and welcome everyone to the Credit Union Connection. I have amazing guests here with me. I have Shari Kraut and Molly Lurch from Cultivate. How y'all doing today? Talk a little bit about what y'all do.
We're really passionate about helping credit unions build more human and trusted workplaces. And we do that through a variety of different ways. But really, at the end of the day, it's about understanding great employee engagement and experience strategies, whether that's leadership development, org design, corporate communications, or just coming alongside and helping move forward some of the people initiatives that organizations have.
All right. Well, that is very cool. Great intro. Great elevator pitch. And that's exactly why I asked you all to come in today, because one of the things that's really popular, really a topic of interest among credit unions is culture. And particularly with all the changes that have come along since COVID and even before, with, the general technology evolution, is branch culture is changing tremendously as branches change. So, especially right now, credit unions are having difficulty attracting and retaining employees. So what's important to understand about the branch culture?
All right. So what's important to know about the branch culture today? I think it's good to maybe do a little bit of a look back. So if we think about what's happened over the last several years in the branches, our branch employees, they didn't stop going to work. So they were there servicing members, really addressing a lot comparative maybe to some of our other workforce that had the flexibility, had options like remote work. And I think maybe not always feeling a lot of appreciation for that, or understanding that how valued they were. Fast forward now, I think they're addressing a lot of member concerns, right? The markets are challenging, people, inflation, like how all of those things are like they're addressing them as part of their day-to-day. Partner that with the evolution that branches were already underway, right? Really changing to more service centers and transaction centers, the skill set changes that were needed as far as being able to be more problem solving, more empathy in the work that they were doing, and even doing, some financial education for members. So, there was already this change in play. And then technology was changing, video tellers, like they were around, but they weren't really leveraged at the same point. So I think, understanding branch culture really needs to go and look at the bigger picture and say, okay, where is the state today? And I think where our employees are is that they're looking to be seen. So I think, one of the things that leaders can really do is think about, how can I help my employees, especially in our branches, be seen, recognized, supported, and really make sure that that's a part of the focus.
I think it's also important to connect them back to the mission and the purpose of like why we're in a branch, why we have credit unions. And so as often as we can help them personally feel seen, but also feel connected to the credit union, I think that's really where you can start to see employees feel like a sense of belonging.
That's certainly something that credit unions have taken for granted forever, because they have these stories but it's what they do every day. So it doesn't stand out to them the way it does to other people. So very interesting. Thank you for that. So a huge piece of the evolution has been technology, as we mentioned. It's affected the structure and workflows of the branch, as well as how credit unions serve members. You mentioned ATMs, ITMs, video tellers, which just being on Zoom a couple times a day can be draining. I can't imagine 8 hours of it or what have you. But yeah, talk a bit about the impact that technology has had on the culture of the branch.
Technology's had an impact on branches for at least 2-3 decades. For first it was online banking, email. I mean, we're talking technology has been constantly evolving, and I think what we're seeing now is it's speeding up. It's happening quicker, and that's why access to technology and giving branch employees technology that helps support how they show up in front of a member is so critical. We're seeing credit unions really taking a look at how they're serving up knowledge, how they're serving up information, and how they can streamline it. So thinking about things like a digital workplace, really evolving that internet that used to be a one-way communication tool. And now we're seeing digital workplaces where employees get to be a part of the conversation. They can ask questions. They can search things with more of a Google-like search versus some of our older, SharePoint solutions used to do. So I think we're seeing technology as an asset versus, something that felt really archaic. Shari, what would you add?
Yeah, I think any of us, if we haven't, as leaders in a credit union space, if you haven't been to a contact center or a call center recently, you should go, because you'll really understand how, or even in a branch, right? Like how that technology is disconnected. Employees are using multiple systems. They're trying to search information on an ever-changing marketplace. Like it's really challenging. And so I think really thinking about when we think about the technology that we're expecting to provide to our members, like how is that really then really coming back to how are we thinking about the technology for our people?
Right. And in addition, these are often the least paid people at the credit unions too, and probably the more important ones at many of the times. So, really interesting when you talk about recognition. What are some ways that you've seen credit unions recognizing their employees in the branch?
Putting recognition, when you're thinking about a branch footprint, most of the time there's multiple locations. You might have your support teams in different corporate locations or working remotely from home. And so finding a way that's very digital in nature, but doesn't lose that sense of personal feeling. So we see branch managers recognizing individually and maybe a team meeting, but then sharing it in some sort of system that allows them to broadcast it and share it with the rest of the credit union. And the best ones even have the ability where there's really social recognition happening, where other employees are able to say, yeah, Sarah, thank you so much for doing that. Or that's an amazing story you shared, Shari. So it creates more of an engaging experience for everyone around that special story of recognition.
The real human experience too, because there is the engagement, the back and forth. Yeah.
Sure.
Well, and I think some of the best programs are also built off the values of the organization. And so when you think about a branch, and I think some of the challenges, we kind of talked about that, is that there's an isolation feeling sometimes with our branches compared to maybe the feeling that some of our corporate employees are feeling. And so how do you make that connection? You bring everyone back to the values of the organization and the behaviors that really live them. And then that then creates connection, but it also really then helps show meaning. So when someone says, you demonstrated this value by doing this, that's really meaningful. Like I had a choice to do that, and someone saw that, and that can still be in the back office, right? So then the connection is built between the two different functions.
Absolutely. And so, there's also technology that scares people right now. Chat GPT, of course, is the big one, but AI in general and the talk of it taking over a lot of these types of jobs. Is there fear among the branch staff, and what can credit unions do to assuage that?
I imagine there's a little fear. How would there not be fear, right? When you look at some of the headlines in the news that we know branch employees are reading and absorbing. But our hope is that that fear is quickly subsided, that leaders are talking about how that technology, how AI is going to help improve their jobs by making things feel less, laborious, that they can really take the time that AI is, taking from them and investing in that personal relationship, because that's something that we know AI isn't going to be able to master. So really freeing them up to do what we've been saying we've wanted employees to be able to do for so long, stop with the transactions and create more of a relationship with a member.
I think AI too doesn't ask the question behind the question. And I think when we talk about servicing members, sometimes what we think, they come in for isn't what they really need. And the best employees are committed to the relationship, to the financial well-being, and they're asking deeper questions. And so I think, technology like affords the opportunity to spend more time doing that. And at the end of the day, I think Molly and I believe that that's what our branch employees, like, that's why they do the work, is that they want to really help other humans be better. So I would hope that they would look at it as a way to do what they really are passionate about.
Mhm. Yeah,
I think the worst thing leaders could do right now is not talk about it because it's everywhere. Everyone's talking
right.
about it. And so if you're a credit union leader out there and you're thinking about how this impacts your team, talk about it. Ask employees too. You know, they're going to understand, they're going to have questions, engage in that dialogue. I think that would be our recommendation for sure.
Right. 'Cause in that particular situation and many others, silence can be deafening, right?
And
Um,
it can create a sense of anxiety if they don't know what's on your mind.
right. And which is all about communication, right? Whether it's through the digital platforms you were talking about, or, you know, verbally one-on-one and in groups. And all of that takes a lot of strong coordination and effort and intentionality around it. So, how do credit union leaders go about doing that, accomplishing that? What needs to be and who needs to be involved?
Ideally, this would be a function or a division within every credit union, right? But the reality is that that's not an option, especially for credit unions that are maybe smaller in employee count. And so we believe that if credit union leaders are able to establish programs and processes around communication that are known across the organization, that really can help improve communication and get to that level of clarity that employees are seeking from leadership. Um, I think when you think about who needs to be involved, it's who's communicating things, where is the information living? And so it's bringing all of those things together and creating almost like a user guide or best practices. I mean, it can get even as granular as, you know, we launched Teams and Microsoft 365, you know, how is that being used? How should Teams be used? And just providing employees guidance. Like Teams is where you go to ask a quick question. If it's, you know, this kind of subject in nature, an email is best, or this is where you go to find that information that we communicated 3 weeks ago. It's all just about setting the context and then not being afraid to change it if it's not working. I think that's really key. We see a lot of times we want to process and we want to feel really confident about where things are. But at the end of the day, I think like Shari said earlier, it's so important that we're getting out into the branch and making sure that those programs and processes are actually helping employees. And if they aren't, maybe make tweaks and change it along the way to make that communication experience the best it can be.
I think the other part about communication is we wait too long. We aren't as transparent up front a lot of times, especially with our branch staff. So, you know, we deal with the change, like we know the market's changing, the products are changing, whatever it might be. And we've worked it as leaders. And then we don't include our employees that are like actually working with the members in the process. And then we just communicate to them. And so I think it's really about being intentional about incorporating everyone is accountable for the success of our members, right? And so like, how are we using them as part of that? I think the other part is that, and it's really why Molly and I, we feel like we're kind of like our secret weapon is so many leaders are so focused on these employee engagement components, right? They know what the right things are to do, but they don't always have the skill sets and know how to really engage employees in the process, whether that's communication, events, whatever it might be. And so really thinking about when you think about communication, it's not just emails and it's not just, you know, how to use, it's really like, how do you use it to engage people in the culture and the outcomes and all of those components.
Yeah, so a lot of things to implement and know, not just slapping up a platform and saying, here it is, right? Yeah, which is
And
sometimes
being
how we
clear
go about
about
them.
what the different roles are, right? Like what's a branch manager's role in communication versus the CEO versus an employee, like being very clear and then open to changing it when different messages need to be shared in a different way.
Yeah, yeah, and the other thing is iteration. Sometimes that's been something that Ukrainians can trip over in myriad different ways. And we all can. But yeah, so I'm gonna start with you, Shari. Back to the original question though for a little bit. Credit union leaders are having difficulty attracting and retaining employees, particularly in the member service area. So what needs to change at the top for that to be successful?
So what needs to change? What do leaders need to do to better retain and attract employees? I think, I'm actually going to go off of something that you just said. Like, we're expecting a lot of our branch employees, and they are often the lowest compensated. I think it's about really being thoughtful about how we place value on those roles. How are we compensating them for the work that they're doing? How are we providing benefits that are meaningful to them? I'm going to let you know that one of the things that makes me the most disappointed sometimes is when leaders are crafting benefit options that fit their lifestyles, but not the lifestyles of their frontline workers. And I think, really stepping back and saying, how do I make sure that they are successful? We talk a lot in our industry about financial well-being, but are we really stepping back and doing that for our own people? I think that's an important place for leaders to spend as well. I think it's about connection. I think I get it. COVID happened. We were working remotely, all of those things, but branch leaders and top level leaders, if you haven't been in your branches, you need to be there. You need to be interacting, you need to be asking, you need to be listening and not telling. I think that will help demonstrate and retain those employees that feel like they are not being seen. And then I think it's about really engaging them in the solutions. Like, we're all in this together. Culture is owned by all. We win when we're all together. And then lastly, I'm going to jump on one more thing you said, Sarah, which is we have the very best mission statement out there. People helping people. It is meaningful. It is it can change the world, and yet we hardly ever talk about it when we're trying to attract great talent. And so I think that is one way that the industry can really leverage that, and top level leaders can leverage that.
100% agree. That's one of the biggest things, is the credit union awareness. I want credit unions not only to be number one financial choice for consumers, but number one employment. Nobody goes out leaving college or whatever and say, I want to work at a credit union. Very few. Molly, I'm going to go to you then too about attracting and retaining. What do you see as changes from the top that need to happen?
I think when we're thinking about retaining and attracting employees, I think we must act. Like, we've done a lot of asking, we've done a lot of surveys, especially I'm assuming through the COVID era. We're out of it. I think it's time for leaders to act. We were talking with a leader this week, and it was so exciting to hear how their engagement scores have increased in a short amount of time. And every single thing that was attributed to those scores changing was as a result of those leaders taking the feedback that employees had, and they weren't afraid to act on it. And of course, when you're changing things, you might move someone's cheese, or you might, ruffle a few feathers, but as long as you're keeping strong communication throughout that process and really explaining to employees, this is what we heard from you, and this is why we're changing it. If that's really the truth at the core, I think employees are going to respond really well. And that specific credit union we were talking about, their retention has been doubled. Like, their turnover has been cut in half. And so what they're doing is working. And their next step is to help understand skill gaps and succession planning. And so it's acting on things and then preparing for the future and making sure employees feel a part of the credit union. And I think all of those things lie with leaders, and they can make a huge difference.
And that's really, I'm going to jump on one thing you said, Molly, just then, was career path. A lot of credit unions aren't terribly focused, especially, at the lower levels, or particularly at smaller credit unions where there isn't a lot of movement. But there are ways to build career paths regardless of the position or the size of the credit union. Any thoughts on that?
Shari, do you want to jump in? She had a great idea the other day. I'm hoping she'll share.
Remind me.
Gap assessment.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I think that's a really great place to start, is understanding like where where are your employees today? And then what are the skill sets that they need either to be more successful, to get that next job, or be ready for the job of the future? I think we all know that, we just talked about how technology has been with us and has been changing how jobs are done and how we interact with members, how we run our business. So I think we can guarantee that it's going to continue to do that. And so what is really going to be needed is a lot of those really great interpersonal skills, and how can we really grow those pieces? Here's the other part. I think we're foolish to think that our internal development teams can serve all, right? They just don't have the capacity to serve all. So I think it's really about understanding what are some different ways that we can plug in opportunities for people to continue to develop. And then probably lastly, I think it's about let the person say what they want to do. Like, what are my strengths? Where do I want to grow? How can I find, I know I have this awareness of that I might need to grow in this area. How can I find that? It's on us as leaders to help partner that, to help find those resources so they can continue to develop.
Right, because if you're an 18, 19-year-old teller coming in and you want a career path, you may not know how to ask for it, or may assume it's not available if the upper leadership doesn't make it known, for sure. So we've covered a lot on the branch culture and how it's changed. Any final thoughts from either of you? Molly, we'll go to you first this time.
Yes. Oh man, there's a lot of thoughts, but I think the one thing I'll say is I hope boards continue to ask about succession planning, because when we're thinking about credit unions, there are a lot of talented people in the organization, and they might just have a few gaps. And if they're able to identify those while the CEO is currently sitting in that role, they're able to start to set up the pipeline really strongly. So I hope that boards continue to ask about succession planning, and I hope leaders continue to think about succession planning internally for different leadership roles throughout the credit union. And a part of succession planning, just kind of hanging out there, is org charts. And we hear org design come up so frequently these days, and it's really good that it's happening because things have changed so much. And so my only other final thought is, if you're a leader out there and you're thinking to yourself, there's some gaps, it's time to look at the org chart. It's actually probably time to visit it, even if it was done 6 months ago, because things are going to be so different in 6 months from now. And so always thinking about how things are working within your credit union and how to best pair different teams together for different outputs. So just don't be afraid to change things up, because the business has changed so much, and the org structure needs to reflect that.
And to you, Chari.
I'll go back to the kind of the branch theme that we've talked about today. I think probably through my long career in credit unions, I've heard that branches are going to go away, and I don't see branches going away. What I do think, though, is that we need to be thoughtful about how we can deliver services through multiple channels. So we are servicing our communities with different ways. So I think it's, as we think about our branches, I think we think about what is their core purpose that we want to have happen there. Are they the deep problem solving service centers? Or, what exactly are they? Are they a place where our community can come together and continue to grow as far as financial well-being? Knowing that, but then also understanding that, there will be banking that will occur there, but we also have to be really good about being able to help others do banking outside of those branches, because I can attest that I have credit union loyal members in my household, but if I told them to go into a branch, they probably would not do that. So I think it's about really understanding the channels, and then making sure that whatever those purpose, the purpose is that it's very clear and it's easy, it's convenient, it's all those things that I think our members desire. So again, I don't think branches are going away. I guess that's maybe the theme that I would say is I think that they're here. It's that they're just going to continue to evolve. And I think that's a good thing. I think, and that's a good thing for employees.
That's exactly the word, evolve, because yeah, I 100% agree. The branches aren't going away. They're just going to be very, very different going forward because people are different. Thank you, ladies of Cultivate, for joining me today. Molly, Shari, appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Bye.